I wanted just to start by just giving a background about myself, a kind of very kind introduction, just then introducing kind of a bit about myself. I think my career is more usual nowadays than it perhaps would have been in the past, which is I didn't simply go from university to PhD to postdoc to a lecturer position, which is what I'm in now, but I rather took a bit of a sort of circuitous route, which I think is more common. And I think that's really valuable. It's a really exciting change in how research happens. It's quite common now for people to go into conservation organisations or other fields, depending on what area of research you're in, industry, and then come back into academia again. And that's what I did. So I did my undergraduate degree here in Cambridge, my PhD in Cambridge. Then I moved off and worked for the Wildlife Trust for about 4 years, which was based on local conservation issues, so nothing to do with oil palm at all. And then I went back to work for a Royal Society funded project in Malaysia for 2 years before then coming back into Cambridge again. And that, I think, is one of the things I've really enjoyed about my career, is working with really quite a diverse range of different people in different countries, different parts of the world, but also different types of organisations. So working with people in academia is very different to working with people in a conservation organisation. And there's different priorities. And of course, different people with different backgrounds come with different strengths. So that's always been really interesting. What I want to try and do today over the next 30 minutes or so is really introduce you to the area of research that I've been working on, I suppose, on and off since my PhD, which is oil palm plantations. But I think this is something which is perhaps a kind of a wider issue, if you like, in terms of how we manage the environment for plants and also for animals, of course, all the things that rely on plants for their food. And that's the expansion of agriculture and the change in agricultural practices worldwide, which is a huge issue. And I think oil palm is just one example of that. It's now the most productive, most important vegetable oil crop worldwide. It's growing exclusively in the tropics because oil palm is a tropical plant. But of course, its expansion has come at big costs in terms of the environment. So what I want to try and do is think about a little bit about what those costs are in the opening bit, and the weaknesses, I suppose, of oil palm or palm oil, the product of oil palm, but then think about the strengths in terms of its very high productivity. And then in the main part of the talk, think about some of the work that our group has been doing, or collaborators from our group have been doing, trying to understand ways that oil palm plantations can be managed to make them more sustainable, to make them have less of an impact, negative impact on the environment. Now, thinking about oil palm itself, I mean, I think probably everyone is aware of palm oil now. That wouldn't have been the case perhaps if I was giving this talk 8 or 10 years ago. It's an incredibly important product, palm oil. It's found in nearly everything. Most of you will probably have had it in your breakfasts this morning, in some form or another. The majority of the product goes to foodstuffs, goes to vegetable oil in food. So breakfast cereals will have it in, breakfast bars will have it in, chocolate will have it in, all of these kind of things. It's also used in biofuel, but again, the majority of it is still going for foodstuff. It's still going for food worldwide. Its expansion has been incredibly dramatic. I'm going to use this schematic from The Guardian, I think, which is a really nice one. But what you've got here is size of circles, which illustrate area of oil palm in different parts of the tropics. We're starting off in the 70s here. I'm going to zoom you forward to the 90s and then through into the 2000s. And what you can see is, of course, expansion has increased worldwide, but it's particularly been focused in Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia and Indonesia, which are the two big red circles on the right-hand side here of the graph of the map, which have been now the biggest producers of palm oil worldwide. An enormous area of palm oil, so large parts of the tropics are now covered with this crop. And of course, that comes with costs because, of course, in the tropics we've got tropical rainforests, which are the most diverse terrestrial habitat on Earth. Lots of studies have looked at the effects of oil palm expansion as forest is replaced with oil palm. And that's what's shown here in this arrow plot. This was put together by Tom Fail a few years ago now, but it's a very nice plot for illustrating changes seen across different groups of organisms. And so what we've got here is basically all the different groups of organisms are represented by a single arrow for a different study. And what Tom's plotted here is studies. So each arrow is a different study. This is a kind of meta-analysis, analysis across studies. And what is plotted here is differences in terms of abundance on the y-axis and species richness, abundance on the x-axis and species richness on the y-axis. And what that means is that the forest is on the tail of the arrow, the oil palm is on the head. So if the arrow moves from the right to the left, there's a decrease in abundance of individuals within that group. If the arrow moves down from top to bottom, there's a decline in species richness, number of species, which are found in different systems. And if you unfocus your eyes, hopefully what you can see is that the arrows move predominantly, let me show this, to the from the right to the left and down. And that means most of the studies that have compared forest to oil palm plantations have found a lower abundance and a lower species richness of taxa in these different systems. So these have quite profound impacts. There's a few exceptions to this, which is quite intriguing. And often as a researcher, one of the things you want to look at is exceptions, because very often that can give you an idea about how you might manage ecosystems to reduce some of these negative impacts. So that's the downside of palm oil. It's certainly come with big costs. The flip side of this is it's got incredibly high production per hectare. So this is shown here for different types of vegetable oil crop. Soybean, sunflower, rapeseed, and then oil palm here. It's about 5 or 6 times more productive per hectare than other crops. And that's really significant because what it means is that you need to grow much less of this to produce the same amount of food. So at the moment, this is really important for that reason. It can spare, if you like, tropical systems or less disturbed tropical systems by growing more crop on a smaller area. One of the reasons, perhaps, why we see such a dramatic loss of biodiversity when forest is converted to oil palm is because of a big change in the structural complexity. And these figures here illustrate this, but these are based on real data from forest transects taken in Malaysia, in forest and also in oil palm plantation. What you can see on the left is the forest and on the right is the oil palm. And what we go from is a forest which is incredibly complex, hundreds of tree species per hectare, trees reaching heights of 70, 80, even 90 meters. Imagine how incredibly tall tropical trees, going down to just one species, oil palm, with a maximum height of perhaps 12 to 14 meters. So all of this complexity, these different understory layers, everything like that is being lost as forest is converted to oil palm. Lose all of that complexity above you in a tropical ecosystem, and it means you're also exposed to the rays of the tropical sun. So what tends to happen is when you convert forest to oil palm, things become much hotter, things become much drier. And that's what's shown here, some really nice data from Stephen Hardwick and colleagues, who put out hundreds of data loggers across different habitats, again in Malaysia and Borneo. And what they recorded on the left is temperature throughout the day, and on the right is humidity throughout the day. And what we've got is 3 habitats represented here: the oil palm habitat, OP in grey, old growth forest, which is undisturbed forest, OG in red, and logged forest, which is slightly disturbed forest in blue. And we're looking at humidity, temperature on the left and humidity on the right over 24 hours. And hopefully what you can see is that in the oil palm plantation, the temperature goes right up during the day compared to the forest habitats. If we have a look here, it's about 4 or 5 degrees hotter. So far higher temperature increases over the course of 24 hours as a result of habitat conversion than you'll get from the combined impacts of climate change globally over 100 years. So really, really big impacts here. You can also see a similar mirror image in terms of humidity. If things get very hot, they also tend to get very dry in these conditions. So really dry during the day in oil palm plantations comparatively for the tropics, down to 75% humidity. And that's the sort of thing that can really dry out small organisms. Of course, it can affect plants as well, affect their ability to have their stomata open, things like that. So these impacts are immediate and really large in terms of the kind of conditions that organisms can tolerate, can cope with in these disturbed habitats. So perhaps not a surprise that we see these big drops in biodiversity. Now, what my research group and our collaborators were really interested in was not the initial change from forest to oil palm. That's kind of already happened. What we're more interested in is thinking about the oil palm plantations itself. So the middle bit, can we change the management to increase biodiversity, to reduce some of these negative impacts of agricultural expansion on biodiversity within functioning and productive oil palm landscapes? That's the kind of the question we're most interested in. And what we were particularly interested in was borrowing some of those ideas for why species are lost when you convert forest to oil palm, and apply that to the agriculture crop itself. In particular, we're thinking about structural complexity. Are there things about the structural complexity that we can increase in these agricultural landscapes and therefore increase biodiversity, so make them a little bit more forest-like? I should say as a caveat here, no matter what you do in oil palm, you're never going to make it as biodiverse as a forest. That's not what we're aiming to do. What we're talking about here is large areas of productive agricultural landscape. Can we tweak the management to make it more biodiverse? It's not a replacement for forest. Forest must always be conserved wherever possible in terms of biodiversity. That's really important for biodiversity. But within agricultural systems, we think there's still lots you can do to make it better. And that's what we're most interested in. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we looked into that and the experimental designs we employed to try and understand that in a little bit greater detail now. In particular, we established quite a large collaboration with the research arm of an oil palm company, with something called Cinemas Agro Resources Technology Research Institute, which is a really major oil palm research hub. And they were very good in terms of giving us access to their plantations and also providing us with lots of resources to enable us to carry out large-scale experiments that we'd never been able to do by ourselves. So the case of our group, basically conservationists, working quite closely with the oil palm industry to investigate ways that these systems can be managed to make them a little bit more sustainable. We called our project the BEFTA project. You have to have an acronym to receive any funding in research. So ours was the BEFTA project, which stands for Biodiversity Ecosystem Function in Tropical Agriculture. And we're thinking about having BEFTA awards for the best research. So this is a general setup of the project. We're based in Sumatra in Indonesia, in Riau province, which is right in the middle, which you can see in the inset here. And our plots were kind of replicated in triplets at a large scale across the plantations. And that's what you can see in the little yellow boxes on the right-hand side, with each triplet encased in those red boxes. That's the sort of setup. It's a large spatial thing, which is reasonably well replicated. If you were to put a pin in the part of the world that has the highest density of palm oil or oil palm in the world, I think it would probably land pretty close to our plots. So we're dealing with a landscape which has already seen major change. Nearly all, 95% of the forest cover in this area has already been lost. There's really no forest left. What we're dealing with is an intensive agricultural landscape and thinking about ways that can be managed to increase biodiversity and increase associated functions that might be associated with that. That's what we're really interested in. We thought very carefully about the experimental design, and in particular, we were interested in trying to really tease apart what the impact of changing management in these systems was. And one of the key things we were interested in was the understory. So oil palm is a perennial crop. It can last for 25 years before it's replanted. And in that time, it can develop really quite a diverse understory. But the interesting thing about this is that different managers, different oil palm companies manage this understory, of quite diverse understory of plants in lots of different ways. They either clear it entirely, so really kind of like open conditions in the understory, pretty much down to the soil, or they'll allow it to grow up and hardly use herbicides at all, and everything in between. The companies that we were working with, the company we were working with particularly, did an intermediate thing. They sprayed along access lines with herbicides, but they left the rest of the understory more or less undisturbed. And so what we wanted to investigate in our experiment was ways that the impact of this varying management treatment on species diversity and on ecosystem functions in oil palm plantations. And so we did this in a so-called BACI design, before-after control impact design. What we did was first establish these triplets of plots. This is what you can see here. I've not made a mistake in having the same photograph. I'm just illustrating that all of the conditions here were the same before our treatment. And what we did was assign at random in each treatment a reduced, a normal, and enhanced treatment. I'll tell you what those are in a sec. And what we then did was set up quite large plots, 150 meters by 150 meters, where we recorded whole loads of different things about the environment. I'm going to come on to that in a sec as well. Then after a year of recording, what we did was then change the management. We worked with the oil palm companies to either have the herbicide regime go up to keep things as normal in these plantations, which, if you remember, was an intermediate level of herbicide spraying, or to stop herbicide spraying entirely and allow the understory plants to grow up, their enhanced treatment. So what we had was a before and after these treatments went in, and a controlled investigation in that we've got our normal treatment staying the same, with another treatment reducing understory complexity, and another treatment enhancing it. So this is a very strong experimental design, because it means we can look before and after the treatments, we can look across the treatments to really understand what the impacts of this changing management is on biodiversity and ecosystem processes within these systems. So we started data collection in 2012 and we applied treatments about a year, just over a year later. So we've got a whole year's worth of data on all these plots before we'd changed anything about them at all. Now, once you've set up an experiment like this, you want to try and measure as much about the ecosystem as possible to make sure you can really kind of make full value of what's a really labor-intensive thing to do. And we really wanted to try and understand the entire tropical system as far as was possible. So what we did was collect a whole range of different aspects of biodiversity across all of these different systems. So we did transect walks for birds, we looked at frogs, we did camera trapping for leopard cats, we looked at understory plant diversity, we looked at a whole range of insects. I'm really an insect ecologist, so this is probably slightly heavy on the insect and invertebrate side of things, but of course they're very important in plantations. And we did this by fogging with a biodegradable insecticide. We fogged the understory to see what dropped out in different conditions. We had these special combination traps, which is what, if you can see my pointer, these traps are down here, which are a combination of intercept traps with little tents on the top and pitfall traps at the bottom. So we could collect anything that was flying along the understory would drop into this trap, or walking on would drop in. So we collected a whole range of different aspects of biodiversity, a really comprehensive survey. We couldn't have done that all with our own group. What we did was rely on collaborators to come in with different bits of taxonomic expertise to be able to give us a really clear picture of the overall ecosystem. We also are interested in what was going on from a functional point of view. So as well as collecting all of these different bits of biodiversity data, we also collected data on leaf litter composition, on how quickly seeds were removed, how quickly caterpillars were eaten, how much fruit was produced, how much herbivory there was on the palms themselves. So again, all of these different functions within the system that can impact through to yield, kind of effect on yield. It tells you more about how the whole ecosystem is working. So it's quite a kind of, you can imagine almost a network of all these different aspects of biodiversity being affected by understory and themselves affecting ecosystem functions within these tropical agricultural landscapes. I'm going to give you some cherry-picked results here, which will give you a kind of an idea of the findings we had. Well, first of all, I suppose, thinking about the kind of plants is almost the effects of the treatment. The treatment worked, of course. If you spray herbicides, you get a huge reduction in the coverage of plants over time, which is what's shown here. So what we've got is before and after treatment for enhanced, normal and reduced plots. And you can see, hopefully, the mean cover of these plants in set areas. We used quadrats. Every ecologist loves plot quadrats. The mean coverage of vegetation went down in the reduced treatments. It went up a bit in the enhanced treatments, and it remained more or less the same in the normal treatments. So the treatment kind of worked. I've got photos here. I'm not going to introduce everyone, but these are the core parts of people of our team who collected these data, and they'll appear in each of the different slides. We also found similar effects in terms of the species richness, although a little bit different. So when the herbicides were sprayed for the species richness of understory plants, in the reduced treatment, the richness went down. And in the enhanced and normal treatments, it remained more or less constant. So you didn't get an increase in species with the coverage. Rather, the species that were already there just went up in cover in the enhanced treatments. So a little bit of a different effect there in terms of kind of what was going on. Now, the results of that change, we think, probably affected directly the invertebrates, the things living at the soil level in these different systems. In particular, this is again, sort of, I won't mention the individual people. What we did was put out a whole range of pitfall traps in these different systems. We could record the number and the diversity of insects and other arthropod orders moving around the soil surface. And hopefully what you can see is the enhanced on the left, the normal in the middle, and the reduced on the right. For ordinal richness, the kind of number of different major groups in these systems, and abundance on the bottom, there's a kind of stepwise decrease. So enhanced ended up with more, normal ended up with kind of about the same, and reduced was lower. So what we saw was a kind of a drop. When you get less vegetation, you get less understory invertebrates, which is quite important for lots of different processes as well. We're going to come back onto that too. We looked at certain groups in more detail, and this is some work where we looked at ants, which are a really important group of predators in these tropical agricultural systems. The plots here, this is from a publication, but this is slightly differently displayed here. Well, again, what we've got is the reduced, the normal, enhanced, and this time we're showing the before, pre-treatment, and the post-treatment data. So what you want to be comparing is the light and the dark bars for each of these different treatments. And what we found was that for the normal and the enhanced treatments, what we found was that the ant abundance went up whereas the reduced treatment, the ant abundance went down. So having these understory treatments directly impacted aspects of the ant community within these tropical agricultural systems as well. And ants being really important predators, this is probably a really important effect. We also found the same thing for other major groups of predators in these systems as well. And we looked at understory spiders, for example. I don't know how much people don't like spiders quite as much, but in agricultural settings, spiders are really, really important. They obviously produce webs, but you also get lots of species which are active little hunters who will search around for species individually. And these were hugely impacted, particularly the understory spiders were hugely affected by the treatments. Again, with the enhanced treatments, you can see here for the abundance on the top being higher than the standard and the reduced. So more vegetation improved the number of ants, increased the number of ants. It also increased the number of spiders as well. And we found the same sort of effect for spider species richness, which is shown on the bottom here. The enhanced and the normal treatments had higher numbers of spiders than the reduced treatments. So we're beginning to get quite consistent patterns here in terms of what's going on. We found the same thing, immediate effect for frogs as well. And so a different taxonomic group, we're going from invertebrates into vertebrates. But when we compared the numbers of frogs, control treatments versus the reduced treatments, well, then again, the abundance was lower in the reduced treatments than in the other treatments. So again, having this understory vegetation perhaps directly affect frogs, and perhaps also indirectly through having fewer other things to eat, fewer invertebrates to eat in these systems. One thing we were really surprised about was we also picked up effects even on quite large species in these systems. Oil palm plantations, although lots of the native species will be lost, there's a few things that do rather well. And one of these is these fantastic leopard cats. So a kind of wild cat that's quite widely spread in Southeast Asia. And these can be really important for things like eating rats, pest control. That's a very important pests in oil palm plantations. They eat the fruits. What we found here was that in the enhanced treatment, again, we got a higher abundance or a higher incidence of leopard cats. You can see one here on our network of camera traps. Now, because our plots are only 150 by 150 meters, we don't think this is a population going up in the same way as it might be for the ants or spiders, but rather we think that having this understory vegetation is really important for leopard cats in terms of providing places for them to rest during the day. So probably the numbers going up because they're using that bit of the ecosystem more. This is a really surprising result for us. I really didn't expect us to find any effect on these larger bodied things at all, but we did. So the impacts are remarkably kind of consistent across quite varied taxonomic groups. Of course, put this together, and perhaps you won't be surprised that we begin to find impacts related to the functioning of these ecosystems as well. So comparing again, this is looking at decomposition. What we did was basically put out tea bags filled with standard leaf litter, and you can put them out at set times, and you can see how quickly the leaves in there decompose. That's what's being shown here. And what we found was, perhaps unsurprisingly, given all the biodiversity data, was that decomposition dropped as you had less understory vegetation as you went from the enhanced to the normal to the reduced treatments. And of course, with all these predators, it's perhaps not surprising as well that we also found a drop in the amount of herbivory in the enhanced treatments versus normal treatments versus the reduced treatments. So again, having more predators around seems to be having a direct impact in terms of controlling herbivores and in terms of reducing the amount of herbivory. So what I've tried to do, I'm giving you very much a whistle-stop tour, but what we've basically shown here with just this first project is that small tweaks in the ecosystem can have really dramatic impacts in terms of what species are actually found in different ecosystems, and ultimately, of course, therefore, how these ecosystems function. This is just a small change in understory management. You get all of these impacts. So it sort of illustrates again that once you start working in this way within agricultural systems, you can begin to understand quite a lot about core ecosystem processes, but also, of course, lots about ways that these management in these systems can be changed, tweaked to increase biodiversity while still allowing them to be productive. I want to finish off by thinking some future opportunities or some other bits that are kind of spun out of this. This whole project was really based on a collaboration with industry, conservation group and an oil palm industry. So it's quite an unusual thing, I think, in that respect. And what it's really shown us is there's huge opportunities for this kind of stuff. Of course, one of the opportunities is related to actually having these big experiments. Once you've got a large experiment like that, you can begin to do more interesting stuff within it. I'm not going to present you with the results in this, but this is a really huge project that was set up by one of the PhD students in our group, Millie Hood, who's now a postdoc. She's left the group, but she's set up big anti-exclusion experiments across our different treatments. So within these understory treatments, she set up another experiment excluding ants with these barriers from individual palms, and she was able to quantify the impacts of these ants, which of course, as we know, are also affected by the understory management. So there's those real opportunities. Once you've got big experiments, you can begin to ask more and more nuanced questions. You can understand the ecosystem in greater detail. We've begun to move on as well to think about other management strategies within oil palm and how that might affect how ecosystems work. In particular, one of the things that's really important worldwide now is lots of the established oil palm that really expanded, if you remember right back to the beginning of the talk, all that oil palm expanded in the 80s and 90s. Of course, that's now reaching the end of its life, and so is being replanted. So Michael Pashkovitz in our group here is now working extensively looking at the impacts of that replanting on diversity within ecosystems. I won't go into detail, but he's got some really fantastic results here on spiders. He's really a spider expert, and he's started looking at the impacts of replanting on spider groups, showing on the whole a big drop in abundance when these systems are first replanted, but then a quick recovery. So quite a hopeful result from that. And finally, the biggest thing we've started to do in the last couple of years is to set up our own restoration experiment. So moving away from management within the agricultural systems themselves to actually trying to put back forest, not across the whole landscape, of course, because this is a productive agricultural landscape, but rather in areas which might have low productivity anyway, or for which there might be really big ecological benefit to restoring. And the key thing with the area we've really focused on is river areas, riparian margins, they're called. So areas just around rivers, which are often flooded, so they don't have huge production in terms of oil palm, but they can have really big impacts on the environment by having high levels of erosion, all sorts of things like that. What we've done is set up the first experiment, again with our industry partners, the first experiment to actually investigate ways that these systems can be restored, ways that we can put forest back. And we've planted tens of thousands of trees in different set treatments to establish which tree species might be best in terms of restoring forest in these areas, and also whether including planting these trees under established oil palm or planting them in the open is better, what gives the biggest benefits. And we're in very early days. We're just beginning to get the data coming through from this, which is always an exciting time for research. We've been amazed at how successful they've been. These have established incredibly fast. This is Agungi Ariawan, who's the manager from the oil palm industry side. He's standing in a tree which was planted only 2 years earlier. So you can see quite how dramatic the growth of these things can be in tropical landscapes. It's really remarkable. And we're beginning to tease apart now what aspects of the environment predict the success in terms of survival and growth of these different trees. All of that's kind of fine, but none of this research is any good unless you can actually transfer this information back to the oil palm industry to actually change management practices. And one of the advantages we've found of working with industry is there's a really clear process for doing that. So throughout the projects we've been running training courses for industry people, increasing basic understanding about biodiversity impacts and ecosystem functions. And from the other side, we've been learning far more about how oil palm managers actually make the decisions on the ground about what makes a productive oil palm landscape. And of course, that two-way dialogue is incredibly important in terms of making sure that results in terms of increasing biodiversity within plantations are transferred across to actually change management on the ground, but also, of course, ensuring the other way that recommendations are realistic for managers. They can actually be implemented. And we found that really productive. Hopefully, just within the half an hour, I think, into the organisers, just about, I've tried to give you an introduction to what oil palm is, and then thinking a little bit more detail about ways that it can be managed. And I've focused very much on the management within oil palm systems itself, rather than thinking about the impacts of deforestation or anything like that. And trying to give you some key results showing that small tweaks in management, small changes in thinking about oil palm ecosystems from an ecological point of view can have really quite big benefits in terms of biodiversity and function and processes in these systems. I'm going to finish just by thanking the project team. I've kind of hinted a few of them in the group, but all of this research, of course, is kind of get the idea, it's quite collaborative. So all of the data has been collected by a huge suite of people, most of whom are shown here. So thank you very much to them. This isn't really my project, it's a much broader project as a result. Thank you.